There is a ghost in the American desert. It is a memory of a childhood journey of flashing lights and twisted metal on a dark ribbon of highway. A young boy stares from a car window at a scattering of Pueblo Indians, injured and dying. He would claim for the rest of his life that in that moment the souls of the dead leapt from their bodies and into his. "I am a receptacle for the spirits," he would later say. "I am a shaman." Whether the event was real or a foundational myth he created for himself is irrelevant. It was the birth of a consciousness. This is the story of Jim Morrison, but it is not the story of a rock star. It is the story of a poet who hijacked rock and roll, using it as a vessel for his explorations into chaos, freedom, and the darkest corners of the human psyche. He was a man at war with his own image, a shaman cursed by the very rituals that made him famous. He saw himself as a guide, meant to lead his audience through the doors of perception to the other side. But the world saw a beautiful leather-clad god and demanded a spectacle. His life became a violent, self-immolating performance, a desperate attempt to destroy the idol so the poet could finally breathe. The shaman's journey began not in a garage with a cheap guitar, but in the sterile, transient world of the American military. As the son of a career naval officer who would later become an admiral, James Douglas Morrison had a rootless childhood. He was a nomad, moving from Florida to California to Virginia to New Mexico, never staying in one place long enough to feel anchored. His father was a towering figure of discipline and authority, the embodiment of the very system his son would dedicate his life to defying. The Morrison household was not a place that nurtured a Dionysian poet. It was a world of polished shoes, crisp uniforms, and rigid expectations. So, the boy escaped inward. He built his home in the pages of books. He was a voracious, insatiable reader, devouring the works of philosophers, madmen, and revolutionary artists. He consumed the nihilism of Nietzsche, the visionary prophecies of William Blake, the drug-fueled epiphanies of the beat poets like Kerouac and Ginsberg. But his true North Star was the 19th-century French symbolist poet Arthur Rimbaud, the teenage genius who abandoned poetry for a life of adventure. From Rimbaud, Morrison learned that poetry was not just words on a page. It was a radical way of living, a systematic derangement of the senses to reach the unknown. Long before he ever sang a note, he was forging his voice from these dangerous, arcane ideas. He was an intellectual in search of a medium, a poet in need of a sound. He found it in the sun-drenched haze of Southern California. In 1965, on the sand of Venice Beach, two former UCLA film students had a conversation that would change the course of music history. Jim Morrison, then a shy, brooding figure, reluctantly recited the lyrics to a song he said he'd been hearing in a private concert inside his head. "Let's swim to the moon," he sang softly. "Let's climb through the tide, penetrate the evening that the city sleeps to hide." The other student, a keyboardist named Ray Manzarek, was thunderstruck. He heard more than a song. He heard a vision. He heard cinematic imagery, dark romanticism, and a hypnotic, bluesy rhythm. He told Morrison they had to start a band and make $1 million. They recruited a guitarist, Robbie Krieger, whose training in flamenco and fingerstyle blues gave him a sound unlike anyone in rock, and a drummer, John Densmore, whose jazz sensibilities provided a subtle, sophisticated pulse. They called themselves The Doors, a name lifted from Aldous Huxley's book, The Doors of Perception, which itself was a quote from William Blake. If the doors of perception were cleansed, everything would appear to man as it is, infinite. It was a perfect literary mission statement for the shamanistic journey they were about to undertake. Their early days were spent honing their unique sound in the grimy clubs of the Sunset Strip, first at the London Fog and later as the house band at the legendary Whiskey A Go Go. Initially, a painfully shy Morrison often performed with his back to the audience, a poet not yet comfortable with being a performer. But as the music and the intoxicants took hold, he began to transform. The turning point came during a performance of their epic song, The End. Fueled by LSD, Morrison launched into a shocking, Oedipal improvisation, screaming a confrontation with a mother and father that scandalized the club owners and got them fired on the spot. But it was also the moment of their birth. They were not just a band. They were a force of nature, a theatrical troupe of provocateurs, with a poet-priest at the helm. The year 1967 was the year the world broke on through with them. Their self-titled debut album was a landmark, a dark, dangerous artifact dropped into the middle of the summer of love. It sounded like nothing else. It was a potent brew of blues, rock, classical and jazz, all held together by Manzarek's mesmerizing organ lines and Morrison's rich baritone voice. From the urgent invitation of "Break On Through" to the other side, to the seductive, dreamlike ballad, "The Crystal Ship," the album was a complete and stunning artistic statement. Its tour de force was the 11-minute psychodramatic masterpiece, The End, which took the pop song format and twisted it into a piece of primal scream therapy, a journey into the darkest realms of the subconscious. Their ticket to global fame was "Light My Fire." Written primarily by Robbie Krieger, the song's 7-minute length was anathema to pop radio. But its hypnotic organ solo and Morrison's smouldering sensual delivery were undeniable. An edited version shot to #1 on the Billboard charts, and the Doors were suddenly superstars. Their rebellion was cemented during a live performance on The Ed Sullivan Show. When the network censors demanded they change the lyric, "Girl, we couldn't get much higher," due to its drug connotations, the band agreed. Then, during the live broadcast, Morrison sang the line exactly as written, staring defiantly into the camera. They were banned from the show forever, and their legend as rock and roll outlaws was sealed. It was also during this period that a photo session with Joel Brodsky produced the iconic Young Lion images, which cast Morrison as a shirtless, leather-clad deity. The poet was now a pin-up. The shaman was now a pop star. And the war for Jim Morrison's soul had begun. He had created a monster, and he would spend the rest of his life trying to kill it. The image of Jim Morrison, the beautiful, brooding Lizard King, was a prison he could not escape. He saw the adulation not as love, but as a profound misunderstanding of his art. The screaming teenage girls who wanted a pop idol horrified him. He was a poet, a filmmaker, a philosopher. But the world wanted a rock god, and it would not take no for an answer. So he began a campaign of systematic self-sabotage. He started drinking heavily, letting his lean physique bloat, obscuring the handsome face with a thick, unruly beard. He wanted to destroy the idol, to make himself physically repulsive to the very fans who worshipped his beauty. This internal fracture created a deep rift within the band. Ray Manzarek, the band's intellectual anchor, tried to reason with him to preserve the magic they had created. Robbie Krieger, the quiet songwriter, largely stayed out of the fray, but John Densmore, the band's moral compass, was deeply disturbed by Morrison's erratic behavior and spiraling alcoholism. He saw Jim's self-destruction as a betrayal of the music, a disrespect for the art they were creating together. The stage, once a space for shamanic ritual, became a battlefield. Morrison would show up late and drunk, forget lyrics, and launch into long, incoherent tirades, deliberately antagonizing the audiences who had paid to see him. He was losing control of the ceremony. The shaman had become a jester, and the doors of perception were slamming shut. He once wrote that a friend is someone who gives you total freedom to be yourself, but he was no longer sure who that self was. The breaking point, the moment the dark theatrics curdled into a career-altering disaster, came on March 1st, 1969, at the Dinner Key Auditorium in Miami. The venue was an old seaplane hangar, a sweltering, overcrowded tinderbox of humanity. Morrison, who had been drinking all day and had missed his flight, finally arrived late, drunk and belligerent. From the moment he stumbled on stage, the concert was a confrontation. He taunted the audience, calling them a bunch of fucking idiots and slaves. The performance was a shambles. Then, in a final act of provocation, he allegedly exposed himself to the crowd. Whether he actually did it is still debated. But in the conservative climate of Nixon's America, the perception was enough. The aftermath was swift and catastrophic. A warrant was issued for his arrest on charges of lewd and lascivious behavior and indecent exposure. A rally for decency was held in Miami. Radio stations across the country banned their music. Promoters cancelled their upcoming national tour. In an instant, the Doors went from being the biggest band in America to being cultural pariahs. The system that Morrison had relentlessly provoked had finally bared its teeth. The poet king had been dethroned, not by a rival, but by his own hand. The scandal marked the end of the Doors as a touring phenomenon and forced a deep, painful reckoning for a man who had flown too close to the sun. The Miami incident forced a retreat. Banned from most major venues, the Doors vanished from the road and reinvented themselves as a studio band. This period of exile led to a remarkable artistic rebirth. Morrison, stripped of the expectations of a live audience, shed the psychedelic shaman persona and embraced his roots in the blues. He traded his leather pants for denim, the Lizard King for the bluesman. The albums they created in this era, Morrison Hotel and L.A. Woman, are arguably their most consistent and mature works. They were gritty, grounded, and steeped in the raw electric energy of the barroom. Songs like the swaggering Roadhouse Blues and the epic sprawling title track L.A. Woman showcased a new Morrison, a powerful, confident singer in full command of his voice. He had won the war against his own image. The beautiful rock god was gone, replaced by a bearded, heavier poet who had found a new authenticity. But the legal battle from Miami still loomed over him, as did the years of hard living. In the spring of 1971, with his legal appeals pending, he enacted his final vanishing act. He moved to Paris with his longtime partner, Pamela Corson. He told his friends he was leaving the music business behind to focus on his first love, poetry. He traded the Sunset Strip for the left bank, the roar of the crowd for the quiet of a poet's notebook. It was a last, desperate attempt to escape the myth, to outrun the ghost of the Lizard King, and to simply be Jim, the writer. His escape was all too brief. On July 3, 1971, Jim Morrison was found dead in the bathtub of his Paris apartment. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure. But as no autopsy was performed, the true circumstances remain shrouded in mystery and conspiracy. He was 27 years old. The poet had finally found the other side. His grave in Paris's Père Lachaise cemetery became an instant shrine, a pilgrimage site for generations of rebels, poets, and misfits. His legacy is as complex and contradictory as the man himself. He was a pioneer who brought a dark, dangerous, and literary intelligence to rock and roll. He was a shaman who conducted chaotic, sometimes brilliant, sometimes disastrous, public rituals. He challenged his audience not just to dance, but to think, to question authority, to confront their own fears, and to break through the doors of their own perception. More than any other figure of his era, he embodied the romantic, doomed rebel, the beautiful artist who burns out rather than fades away. The emotional resonance of his work is the eternal siren song of freedom, the seductive whisper that dares us to walk on the wild side, to test our own limits, and to live our lives not as a quiet journey, but as a fiery, unforgettable comet across the sky.